All right, so now coming to the abdominal muscles, like I said previously, we have externally the external abdominal oblique muscle, and then deep to that you have the internal oblique, and then very deep you have the transverses, and that to me looks like a triangle because it has a broader origin from the lower inner surfaces of the costal cartilages medially. All right, and now what happens is at the musculoaponeurotic junction, you guys, all of the muscles are gonna stop and they are going to form the aponeurosis, and that at that point, you guys, we call it linea similionaris. You guys know that similionar looks like the similionar looks like a crescent shape, all right, because here we have a line that is crescent shape, so we call it linea similionaris. This is basically the start of the aponeurosis of the muscles, and here the fusion of the aponeurosis of three muscles is going to happen. And in the center you have the linea alba, and in Latin alba means white line, so this is basically where everything is going to stop, and this is the destination that is going to get attached superiorly with the xiphoid process, inferior with the pubic symphysis, so that you can go ahead and contract those this abdominal wall. All right, now what happens here is that they don't come and form aponeurosis as just aponeurosis, because they will find on the way the rectus abdominis muscles. All right, we have the rectus abdominis muscles, so these aponeuroses are going to envelop them. So it means enveloping means if this is the muscle, I'm going to cover it from outside and from inside. Is that going to happen everywhere? No, it's not going to happen everywhere. We have differences in the idea here. What is the idea, guys? The idea is that as the muscles try to go ahead and form the aponeurosis at the linea similionaris, now they will want to envelop the rectus abdominis. Okay, they are going to envelop. We have three muscles: external abdominal oblique, internal abdominal oblique, transversus abdominis. All right, this has aponeurosis, it has aponeurosis, it has aponeurosis. The external oblique has an aponeurosis outside. The transversus abdominis has an aponeurosis inside. But the internal oblique is going to have, it's gonna split itself into a half and a half. So half of it will go with the external to make external anterior layer of the rectus sheath, and the inside lamina, we call it inner lamina. Lamina means layer, is going to fuse with the aponeurosis of transversus abdominis to form the deep layer, or the posterior layer of the posterior wall of the rectus sheath. And in between them you have the rectus abdominis muscle. But you guys, this is gonna happen where? It's gonna happen between the costal margin and the arcuate line. This is the story that I just explained to you. Now, what happens above the costal margin and what happens below the costal margin is that all of the aponeurosis, you guys, is gonna come anteriorly. All right, the aponeuroses are going to come anteriorly below the arcuate line. What is arcuate line? I will tell you now. Now, what happens above the costal margin? Everything is gonna be in front, but everything at that point, guys, is only the aponeurosis of external oblique, because at that point we don't have internal oblique and transversus abdominis. Above the costal margin, guys, we don't have transversus abdominis and internal oblique. So the idea is that between the costal margin and the arcuate line, and the arcuate line is a midway between the umbilicus and the symphysis pubis. This is the midway, this is the arcuate line. At that point, all of that until the costal margin, this is going to be 1.5, 1.5. Above the costal margin, you don't have internal oblique, you don't have transversus abdominis, so this is going to be, yes, things are going to be in the front, but it's going to be the aponeurosis of external oblique. And below the arcuate line, all the layers will come anteriorly. If you guys look here, all the aponeuroses are going to come anteriorly, and they are going to leave the posterior wall deficient, only supported by fascia transversalis. All right. So now you have here the clear idea about the rectus sheath and the differences between them. Now, why, you guys, above the costal margin, and what is going to be posterior to the rectus abdominis? What's going to be posterior to the rectus abdominis above the costal cartilage is going to be the, sorry, above the costal margin is the costal cartilages of 5th and 6th and 7th ribs. All right, and of course the parietal peritoneum is there, and below you have only the fascia transversalis and parietal peritoneum. You don't have, of course, the ribs down here. All right. Okay, what do I want to say here? Okay, so you guys grasp the idea that you are enveloping the rectus abdominis. Why this is happening? Above that, you guys, your superior epigastric is going to come to supply the stuff here and the abdominal wall, and below that the inferior epigastric vessels is going to try to get into the rectus sheath and try to get supply. So it makes sense that above the costal margin everything comes anteriorly, below the arcuate line everything comes anteriorly, so that the deep vessels can simply go ahead and pierce the muscles and pierce only the fascia transversalis and get into the rectus sheath, because it's very difficult for those important vessels to pierce the aponeurosis of the 1.5 posterior wall of the rectus sheath. So if you guys look at a real cadaver, you will see that with a deep dissection where we remove the rectus abdominis and the inferior epigastric vessels, you can see that at that point here you have, this is above that, you have very whitish line, and below that you have only the transversalis fascia. It means that below the arcuate line, what was posterior to you is only the fascia transversalis and parietal peritoneum, and then you have here the inferior epigastric. It could come and then it goes inside, and now it can supply structures here, and it can also give superficial vessels. All right, and so this is a nice dissection to show you. These are the rectus abdominis muscle, and these are the tendinous intersections. And then what's interesting about the rectus abdominis is that it originates from down here as a muscle, and it ends as it originates as aponeurosis, and it ends as a muscle. You cannot see the aponeurosis, but it's down here. So you have the aponeurotic part first, and then you have the fleshy, and this is the end of this part of the rectus abdominis, and this is the start of the next one as we proceed until you reach the insertion here. This is going to be the end of the last muscle. So this is a muscle, the whitish part is the start, the fleshy part is the end. Anyway, coming back to the rectus sheath, so you guys can see that posteriorly you have 1.5 layers above the arcuate line, anteriorly it's cut, and we removed the content of the rectus sheath. All right. Now we have internal features of the abdominal wall. So if you try to look at the abdominal wall from inside, you will find that you have 5 folds. If this is your bladder, you have a median fold, you have a medial folds, and you have lateral folds. So what do we mean by fold? It means that the fascia transversalis, as it reflects itself above important structures, it's going to make a fold, and it's gonna give you foci in between them. All right, now if you look at the midline, you will find that this is median umbilical fold, and it's formed by the urachus, which was the connection between the bladder of you and your mom. All right, and then you have the obliterated umbilical artery. It was another connection between you and your mom. And that will obliterate and become ligament after birth, because you don't need blood vessels, blood supply from your mom anymore. So it becomes a ligament, and that is a branch of internal iliac. So it gives you that fold above that, and then the inferior epigastric vessels that we were talking about now. Remember guys, I told you the inferior epigastric vessels, they will try to go from the arcuate line. Now they can pierce and get inside, and above the arcuate line they have the 1.5 layers posterior to them. All right, the inferior epigastric vessels, guys, because they try to reach there and give supply to the abdominal wall. the reflection of the fascia transversalis on top of them is going to give you a lateral umbilical fold. And there is a very important triangle here, okay, the Hasselbalch triangle, and that is bounded by the inferior epigastric vessels, and then you have the lateral border of the rectus abdominis muscle, and down there you have the inguinal ligament. So this is very important, because if there is a protrusion of coils of small intestine, at that point we consider it a direct inguinal hernia. If it comes lateral to the inferior epigastric vessels, we consider it indirect and inguinal hernia, and we're going to understand now the idea of hernia in the coming slides. All right, guys, so these are the